Welcome to episode 3 of season 2 of From the Yarra. This episode was recorded in Jerusalem on the 7th of July 2025. It's my first Jerusalem book launch where I am in conversation with Dr. Sari Nusseibeh, esteemed Palestinian author and the former president of Al-Quds University. We're speaking in front of around 70 Israeli and Palestinian people who live in Jerusalem. This was recorded at the Albright Institute, and I think something a bit different from this launch to the other launches that I've done is that everyone in the audience under the Jerusalem sky in the beautiful garden of the Albright Institute is someone who is living this horrific war at the moment, and I think it shaped the nature of the conversation, the types of questions I was asked, and also the responses of people to a book that says peace is possible at a time where so many people feel helpless and despairing. So I hope you find this conversation meaningful, and it was a great honor to have this conversation with Sari, so enjoy.
Hi everyone. Hi, so as Mahmoud mentioned, I'll be moderating tonight for Ittay and Sari. I'd like to start off by introducing myself quickly. My name is Ittay. I was born and raised in the States, but both of my parents are Palestinian. I currently work as, first of all, my boring 9-to-5 job, which is in Ain Karim University. But the job that truly does give me life is that I am a co-educational director with Ittay Flescher in Kids for Peace. So that is what I do currently. I'd like to start off by introducing Sari Nusseibeh. He's a man who has worn many hats throughout his professional career, a professor of philosophy, the president of Al-Quds University, a political activist, and a co-founder and leader of a union. Not only that, but the Nusseibeh family are the trustees who hold the key to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. In 2002, Sari Nusseibeh was a representative of Yasser Arafat in Jerusalem, and in 2003, together with Amy Ayalon, he co-founded the People's Peace Campaign, which called on people of this land to come together and fight against this conflict. This declaration had over 150,000 Israelis signing it and 100,000 Palestinians who signed it as well, with a two-state solution in ending the awful conflict between both people. First of all, hands of applause for Sari, who has done very many things in his life. And now I'd like to introduce Ittay Flescher, the star of the show and the author of the book, The Holy and the Broken. Ittay is an educational director in Kids for Peace, born in Ramat Gan, but has lived the majority of his life in Australia. Together in Kids for Peace, we bring together Christian, Muslim, and Jewish kids from 6th to 9th grade to break the stereotypes that they might have about each other through learning each other's languages, cultures, traditions, holidays, anything you can think of, even food. Ittay, I personally want to say it is an honor for me to be representing you today in the book, and for those who haven't read it, I can tell you that I read a small part and it brought me to tears. It truly did. Ittay's book is a breath of fresh air. It is a sense of hope, and it is a sense of peace. And thank you so much for the work that you do, that you continue to do, and because of you, I believe peace is possible. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank the Albright Institute and the Educational Bookshop for doing this. And most of all, though, I want to thank Ittay for having asked me to join him in the launch of this book here in Jerusalem. I'm not only glad, I'm very honored to have been invited to this launch, The Holy and the Broken. I think it's an exceptional piece of work by an exceptional person, and I'd certainly encourage everyone who can to read it. I want to bring up some points and questions about it. That's what it will be about in my case. That's what I'll be doing. That may help the audience to get an impression of Now, you grew up, as we just heard, in Australia, and you forged your career there in education in interfaith settings. Then moved here in 2018 to take up the same challenge in the Israeli-Palestinian context, directing the Kids for Peace program, which you say amalgamated itself at some point into the older Seeds of Peace initiative, an Oslo period initiative. The Seeds of Peace being an initiative started, I think, in the early 90s, to which I sent, I think, 2 or 3 of my 4 kids at the time. And that was the Oslo period. By the way, Kids for Peace, we sent our daughter there. Yes, okay. So your career has right from the beginning then been focused on nurturing bridges and the culture of peace across the different divides, with an emphasis on working on the young to achieve this. Now I want to pick up something here you say about this in particular. So in one paragraph in this book, this lovely book, you say the following. You say, in Postman's 1980 book, The Disappearance of Childhood, he wrote, "Children are the living messages we send to a time we will not see." Then you go on saying, "This quote reminds me that children are not simply our progeny, but also our cultural messengers, and we will not be around to see the world that our children create. We can only partially judge our success as parents and educators based on the messages we send them. If we raise them to be empathetic, humble, and compassionate, we can be confident that they will make the world fairer and more just. But if we don't, then the society that the children of Jerusalem will create will sadly appear not much different from the tense and polarized city that exists today." Now my question is, isn't this what you say, like throwing a heavy burden on our children, landing them with something very hard to carry? Shouldn't it be us who can provide them with that future and the peace we yearn for?
So, Masal Khair, Erev Tov, and thank you, Sari, and thank you to the Albright Institute, and to Mahmoud and to Lana, and to all my friends for being here. It's very moving. I feel like it's my bar mitzvah again, seeing so many people here. I hope you don't all throw candy at me at the end, because I'm not ready for that. But I've worked my whole life with children. I probably, from the age of 16, I've been working in a youth movement. Then I taught in a primary school, then in a high school. Now I work in a youth movement with children aged 12 to 16. And now I have also 2 children of my own in that age group, Nava and Eitan. It's wonderful to have you here at this book launch. And I think lots of people, when they think of how they're going to change the world, they think the only way to change the world is through politics. Because politics is where all the decisions are made, and politics is where the powerful people sit, and politics is where the money is. And so people, if they want to see change, they go into politics. And other people say the only way to make change is through activism, is through, being loud on social media and making a lot of noise and protests and that sort of thing. And for me, I guess my whole life, the only thing that I've ever felt is an effective form of change is education. It's what I do well. I'd be terrible at politics because I want people to like me, and I think politics is a bad profession if you want people to like you. And I don't really like, screaming and making noise in protests, although I do go to a lot of protests. But I think for me, the idea that, and I've done this so many times in my life, where you start with a child that knows nothing about a topic, and I'm not the kind of teacher that tells children what to think. Most of my classes are just questions. And by asking question after question, seeing how a child starts asking themselves questions about what they believe and challenging their own biases and where they've come from, I think that's how you build peace. I think it's how you build critical thinking. It's how you build options as well. I think so many people today they look at the world and they see so much horrific pain and suffering, and they think that's the world. The world has to be that way because no one ever showed them that another way is possible. And so that quote by Neil Postman is the notion that like education is an investment, and you don't know. You know, when I think of whys in their piece now, I think of what educators did 20 or 30 years ago to raise the generation we have now. Another interesting statistic is, in most countries in the world, the younger you are, the more progressive you are, and the older you are, the more conservative you are. And this is the only country in the world where the younger you are, the more radical views you have, and the older you are, the more liberal you are. Now, it's interesting that why is this country the reverse of many other places? And I think maybe it's also the advent of social media as well, but we live in an environment where there is a growing radicalization of youth, and youth are often exposed to a lot of poison, you know, online. And I think what organizations like Kids for Peace and what I try and do in my work is to be that alternative.
Well, great. I don't want to examine what you just told us with your son, if that's the person sitting over there, to see whether you tell him or don't tell him what to do. I'll leave that out. But let me move on to a second question, which is related to this, which is to do with your own ambassadorship, so to speak, or your own mission as a messenger. Now, you talk about what your own father taught you. And I want to pick up here a couple of passages. So you say the following. Now, Ittay's father was joined in the 67 war. He was part of that war. He was on the Egyptian front, right? Served on the Egyptian front. So Ittay writes the following. He says about his father that he was a soldier in 67 during the 6-day war. But he didn't once obey what he felt was manifestly illegal. The situation occurred when he was the commander of a tank, after the Air Force had blitzed the Egyptian forces in the Sinai, and many Arab soldiers were waving white flags of surrender. His unit took all the Egyptians as captives, but didn't know what to do with them. They had no place to keep their captives because there was no prison in the Sinai. If the captives were let go, they could again attack Israeli positions as the war continued. An order was given to my father by his commander to kill the captured Egyptian soldiers. Now he, the father, was only 18 at the time. My father refused, instead giving the bound and blindfolded Egyptians water from his own bottle, very scarce resource in the desert, and telling his officer, there's no way I'm doing that, and if it means I'll be court-martialed, so be it. I want to continue with this piece. He says, Ittay, I think that decision typifies so much about what my father taught me in our first driving lesson, meaning wisdom is about much more than just following every law or order set from above. When asked to choose between your nation and your personal values, he told me, don't be right, be smart. From my father, I learned that when I seek to develop an opinion on any matter, I should begin by allowing my intuition to shape my initial perspective. It's then essential to explore opposing viewpoints, to understand potential flaws and embrace a spirit of creative doubt, to uncover information that may challenge my beliefs. Finally, I allow my intuition to guide me in crafting a revised view that sees the humanity of the other. Now, in answering the first question, you added something else, which is critical thinking. Here, you just focus on intuition. And frankly, as I read this, I asked myself the question, can you trust the intuitions of all people? Are the intuitions of all people the same? Are they all good?
I just want to point out, I've done many conversations about this book and no one's ever asked me about that question about my father. So I'll take this opportunity to speak about him. So my father was one of the first children born in this country. He was born 2 days after the Declaration of Independence in Petah Tikva. And his birthday, his whole life was always, within a day of Yom Ha'atzmaut. And when he was 18, he fought in the Six-Day War, and then he fought in the War of Attrition when he was 23, and fought in the Yom Kippur War. And he didn't tell me many stories about the wars that he fought in because they were very traumatic. And when I was writing this book, I was trying to think of what stories he told me about his life, and that story about the water bottle and that he wouldn't shoot the Egyptian soldier, which was an order that he was given, was one that really stuck with me. And I don't know what would I have done when I was 18, because when you're 18 and you have to follow orders and you're in an army and these people 5 minutes ago were shooting at you, you can understand why people would want to kill prisoners, and I know other soldiers did. And I think for him, there was a sense, even when he was 18, that even though I might get in trouble for not following this order, this is something that I should do. And of all the stories he told me about the war, that's the only one I remember. So maybe there were other things that happened to him in the Six-Day War that I don't remember, but I do remember that one. And I think that, intuition, there's a saying in Jewish ethics, it says, Ezeu gibor akovesh et yitzro. Who is someone brave or mighty? Someone that can subdue their inclination. And it's really interesting because often when you think of a gibor, you think of someone like powerful and mighty and that it just rages and has a big sword. And I feel like my rabbinic tradition that I come from is a gibor is someone that can look at an inclination and say, wait, that might be a negative inclination. And for me, clearly, shooting an innocent prisoner would be that. And I think, again, you need a lot of education to subdue negative inclinations, because especially in times of war, and especially the last 20 months that we've been living here, there's such a strong desire for revenge, for both Palestinians and Israelis, and a desire to think with the heart and not with the head. And I think that's what I try and always do as an educator. And I think stories like that, help show people that that's possible.
Well, thank you. I think it's a good answer. Well, let me move on. I just have one or two more questions. In one of your chapters, which you say was the hardest you worked on, that chapter consists of two hypothetical and touching letters you write to an Israeli and a Palestinian respectively, who both went through your program. I want to read out a couple of lines from each one of these letters, and one learns a lot from it. So in the letter to the Israeli, I want to read 3 lines. He says, "For so many years, you were taught that only a strong army can bring us security. Yet I'm asking you to consider an alternative, one that believes the greatest security comes from peace." In a way, turning around the formula that we are used to hearing, that security then peace. But here it is like, Ittay, you're telling him, it is peace that brings security. Now that's the letter to the Israeli. Let me just go on and read a couple of lines from the letter you write to the Palestinian. He tells the Palestinian this: living in a country that is liberated through violence against innocence will leave deep trauma in those who carry it out and produce vengeful neighbors. Even though this strategy may lead to a free Palestine at some point in the future, don't choose that option. Use the power of international law, grassroots coalition building, and political negotiations on your journey to freedom. Wherever possible, take this path. These are very strong messages, I think, to the Palestinians to use non-violence to achieve freedom, and to the Israelis to seek peace in order to achieve security. Aren't these very sort of, how can I describe them, challenging? to the two sides?
Yes, they definitely are challenging messages, and that's why that chapter appears right at the end of the book rather than the beginning of the book, because a lot of the book is really about, you know, philosophy and questioning, but towards the end of the book I wanted to share with the reader where I stand, because I'm on the fence a lot in a lot of the books, but right towards the end, and I thought, you know, those letters, I actually sat with both an Israeli and a Palestinian child at Kids for Peace, and I had them read it, and they both gave me feedback to them, even though the letters weren't to them directly, because I kind of thought, you know, I'm not these children's parents. Every child has their own parent who will give them their own political philosophy, but I thought so often when we raise children, you know, we talk to them a lot about the diet and the clothes they wear and the friends they have, but we very rarely write a political manifesto for our children. And the reason that chapter was hard to write, even though it's only 5 pages, I think I went through like 40 drafts before I was happy with, and most chapters took 1 or 2 drafts, but that I just kept writing again and again and again, and I kept looking at things that I saw children posting on social media and things that children were saying, and I think that notion of a free Palestine, which I talk about what a free Palestine means a lot, it's something that I want deeply. And I know so many Jews, when they hear the word Free Palestine, they shudder. Free Palestine is a threat. It's something that is going to be hostile to me. And to the same extent, I think when Palestinians think of Israeli security, they think of being crushed under occupation and walls and checkpoints and the destruction of Gaza. And I was thinking of how can I take these words that are so fearful to the other side and put them in a language that children can understand in terms of guiding them. And then furthermore, the notion of advocating non-violence in a country where no one believes in non-violence, like non-violence is like, who believes in that? And I tried to develop a philosophy that said one of the main reasons why people don't use non-violence here is because the other side doesn't use so why should I use non-violence when the other side is crushing me with a hammer? And especially given that the Israeli side is so much more powerful than the Palestinian side, I think any sort of call for, you know, resolving our problems through diplomacy or negotiation, especially given the leaders we have, really sounds really far-fetched, but I can't think of any other way to end this, because we've tried violence for so long, and I think the bar for trying violence is like someone says to you, I don't know if this is work, but let's bomb 1,000 buildings and maybe something good will, like people go, okay, let's, you know, like the bar is so low, and people, and whenever I suggest non-violence to people go, that's never going to work. Why should I try that? And I was like, far less people are going to get hurt by that than using violence. And also, every other conflict in the world that's ended has ended around a negotiating table. In Northern Ireland, in Rwanda, in South Africa, World War II, we've got a European Union. You know, I talk about all of these examples. At a certain point, people say khalas. People say, enough of violence, I want to try something else. And so what I try and sort of articulate in the book is, A, why I think non-violence works, and B, why it can work here, and C, I deal with all of the arguments against non-violence, hopefully in a sympathetic way, and explain why I think there's a better way. And D, I do put a lot of pressure on children because adults disappoint me, to be honest. A lot of adults disappoint me because I always think adults should be smart and wise, and we're not often. And so I think writing those letters to children was saying, here's a word of advice from someone that I hope that you can listen to. Obviously you can take or leave my advice because that's the nature of advice. Advice is like a nose, you know, everyone has a piece of advice to give. But, you know, having done over 1,000 hours of dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians, I thought there are certain things that I can see that maybe other people can't see, and that's why I wanted to put it in this book.
Thanks. By the way, I didn't go into a lot of the things so far that Ittay has gone into in the book, including the program, the educational program he had for children, how to develop a conversation, how to include the families in the conversation, the families of those kids. So his efforts over the years have been actually, if you look at them, very well planned, very well organized, and with excellent results as far as I can make out from the different observations he makes about certain things that happened following a particular meeting. But I will leave that to you, to the audience to see when they read your book. But to go back to what you said, I want to tell you that there's one particular good argument, maybe a very good argument, that you could have used talking to the Palestinians for non-violence, which is the opposite of what you said the situation was. You described it as one where the Israelis have the power, and that when the other side has the power, so you as the underdog, so to speak, are compelled to use violence to overcome that power. But actually, you could have said to the Palestinians, you have the power, and because you have the power, you can afford to be and to use non-violence. And by the way, this is an argument I used personally in the campaign we did back in whenever it was for the peace campaign, and it works. And also what works actually is something else about the Jewish ethics, about what being a Gibbor means. I didn't want to raise it at the time, but let me just say now that in Islam, and I'm not a representative of the religion, as you may be of the Jewish religion, we have the jihad in nafs. The jihad primarily is the jihad against one's baser instincts, to be able to control yourself and to act as rationally as possible. Anyway, very quickly, I want to say just make one last point, which is the following. There are different ways in which you try to encourage us to pursue the path of peace. Through example, through your own immersion in different meetings that you've had over the last 2 years, that should actually belong to the dark ages, those last 2 years. But you've been everywhere. You've been to Hawara, you've been to Palestinian, you've been everywhere. You've shared the pain and the anxiety of all the people over the past 2 years in a way far exceeding any that I could have done myself. And I think you should be actually congratulated for doing that. It's something that gives a lot of power to the book that you wrote. You have a chapter on women, and you seem to think that it's important to push women to the forefront of politics. Why do you think that women are a peace agent more than the man? Is that true? That's one question.
Yes. So I'll just say Lindsay taking the photos here helped me with that chapter, so thank you, Lindsay. So there's one of my neighbours, he lives in the same neighbourhood as me, Rachel Gogol, Poland. Her son Hirsch was kidnapped and he was kept in captivity for over 300 days until he was murdered. And she gave speeches all over the world, and she was a real, I'd say, moving force. As I was writing this book, I was constantly reading her speeches. And one day, I think she was at the UN, and she gave a speech called "To the Boys in the Room." And she was commenting on how all the people negotiating for Hamas and for Israel are all men. And she imagined what would happen if the negotiations about the hostages and releasing the Hamas prisoners was done by mothers from Gaza and mothers of Israeli hostages. And that's the question of the poem. And the suggestion that the poem makes is that if all of these negotiations were being done by mothers, they would have come to a resolution far earlier than 640 days. And I think they're right. But I wanted to check, so then I went to a number of scholarly researchers, and they looked at 40 different peace processes around the world where there'd been over 10 years of conflict and mass death. And they found I think it was over 30% of the cases, if women were involved in the negotiations and in the implementation of the agreements, they were far more likely to last than negotiations where women were involved. Oslo, as we know, had no women involved. Aside from maybe Hanan Ashwari and Tzipi Livni, I think there's barely been any women involved in Israeli-Palestinian negotiations at a senior level. And I think when you take out 50% of the population, it means you take out 50% of the ideas. And clearly some men have had wonderful ideas, yourself included. But I think when I wrote about a book about peace, about things that are missing, I couldn't not write a chapter about women's voices being missing, because I think that is, like the chapter on journalism and education, I think having women in the room when these decisions are made about peace and security is essential, and it's definitely something we should try.
Okay. I was going to disagree. And I was going to obey the prompt that your father gave you to be smart rather than right. So in spite of all the statistics you just gave us, my own experience is the women that I know around me are far more fierce than many men, and actually less ready to make concessions than men are. But maybe this is to do with Arabs, I'm not sure. And we have some Arab women, some fierce ones.
Yes.
They can defend themselves
Okay.
and tell us that they are more peace-loving than men. It's possible. Men hide behind the women. And or women hide behind the men. You think that they are okay, but actually every time the man gets back home, the women eggs him on. What? Have you compromised? Have you done this? Anyway. But the other question to do with this, and it's something that you touched upon in the beginning actually, and I want to raise it, and it's my final thing. Now we all, I think, dislike politicians, but I think the book primarily addresses all those issues that at the end of the day will not, it seems to me, and in general do not, bring about or make a decision on peace and war between countries and nations. We have too many global powers, even today. I mean, I'm not sure today if the Israelis and the Palestinians actually have their destiny in their hands, or whether their destinies are actually now in the hands of bigger powers. Regional governments, international governments, and at the end of the day, unfortunately, those who create the life we end up living in are not the nice guys, but the horrible guys. And even if it looks like it's nice, like you look at Europe or America or whatever now and say, that's nice, actually there's a lot of ugliness behind the facade of niceness that we must be aware of. So what I'm saying is, maybe another chapter on politics and what political scientists say, whom I do not personally respect very much either, but maybe a useful thing.
Look, I have a lot of friends who are in politics, and I have a lot of respect for people that go into politics. Laura's here, she's in politics, she's fantastic. No, politics is obviously where change is made. I wrote about what I know. I wrote about education because that's what I've been doing. If I was in politics my whole life, I would have written a book about politics. If I was in advocacy and protest, I would have written a book about protest. I think I didn't want to write a book about something I don't know, because I guess unlike you, I haven't been in the room when negotiations have been made, and I don't know when you have forces and coalitions and pressure from millions of people on your back, how that affects how I make decisions. For me, when I make decisions, I'm standing in front of a room of 14-year-olds, which sometimes can be very intimidating, but it's not the same as standing in front of a Knesset or a parliament or the United States or the Congress or those sorts of things. So I try and write about what I know, and again I write about what I think works as well. And I think there is something about, as a teacher, I often have to solve problems, and they're little problems. You know, he sat in my seat, he cheated on the homework by copying my exam, this girl doesn't like me and she likes that boy instead. And they often want me to solve these problems. Now, this is not the Middle East, obviously, but you deal with these children, and they're at the most heightened emotions and the least likely to be rational possible. And you often have like 3 minutes to solve this problem, because you still have to teach, you know, about the French Revolution or Australian history or whatever I'm teaching. And all of a sudden you have to sort of draw within you. You have to think, what can I do right now to diffuse this situation, to allow these two children to remain in my classroom and to learn together? And I think those skills, which again I write a lot of those examples in the book, are things that could be used in politics and in other places. And I hope that that's why, you know, there's something in this book for everyone.
The ideologies that govern people's actions. At the moment, for instance, what is Zionism? What is the Jewish faith behind what people call now Jewish Messianism? What is the ideology of Hamas? Can we get over all of these things by being nice to one another? Anyway, I think this is a great book that you've written, I really do. I think it's fantastic, everyone should read it. And not only that it's a great book, I think the person who wrote it is really a great man. He's very special. He's really, I mean, I think we should all applaud him.
So with that, we're going to end, but just before we end, there's some books on sale in the corner, and I just want to highlight that in addition to my book, there's 2 other books that I'd really like to encourage everyone to read. The first is Once Upon a Country by Sari Nusseibeh, which was just this week's translated into Chinese, he told me, which is amazing. So it's really, it's reached a long way. And the other is Daybreak in Gaza, of which Mahmoud is one of 4 editors, and it's a book of testimonies from Gaza, not just about the suffering in Gaza, but also how people live in Gaza. And it does a fantastic job at humanizing people that I guess me as an Israeli Jew never see humanized, in ways that are sometimes not even connected to the war, and in ways that are about parenting and jobs and family. And I think it's such an important book to read, which is why I want it on sale here. So yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming here today, and Mahmoud's going to say some closing words now.
Thank you, Ittay. I think you did the sales pitch on me, so I don't have to do it. Do buy a book if you can, or 2 or 3. We also have food being served. Stick around, talk to us, talk to Ittay, talk to Sari, talk among yourself. Stay tuned, we are starting more events, so you'll be excited for a series of events coming up, hopefully keep you busy this summer. But do come to the bookshop every 2-3 days and ask us what's up, what's going on. This is the best way to do it. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.